Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Do you know why we're often bored when friends tell us about their holidays? It's easy to imagine that we're slightly envious because they've had a good time and we haven't. However, that's not usually the case when we get bored. The reason why we're dying to escape is because their stories are all goody gumdrop stories. They will tell you in excruciating detail about the restaurants they went to, the palaces they visited, and all the experiences that they've had. And your brain is waiting for the but. A story without a but isn't much of a story. It's just a pointless blah blah that no one is really interested in. You may politely listen, but that doesn't mean that you're engaged. The same concept applies to any story, and it's why you start off a story with a but. Let's take a look at the story from the brain audit. Imagine you're putting 7 red bags on a flight. You get off at your destination and the bags start rolling off the conveyor belt. You spot the first red bag, you take it off the belt, then there is a second red bag, then there is a third. However, there's a green bag, a polka dot bag, and a big set of boxes. And then you see it, the 4th red bag, then the 5th, and then the 6th. So when do you leave the airport? That's how the analogy or the metaphor runs in the brain audit. You didn't hear the but in the story, did you? However, you felt it. The story was going one way when you were picking off the bags one by one, when suddenly there was this however or but. It showed up in the form of a green bag, a polka dot bag, and those big set of boxes. The second time that you felt all that tension was when we got all the 6 bags off. But that final bag, that was still missing. Let's go somewhat chronologically through the book, which is the brain audit, and get to the second story. And it goes like this. Imagine you're driving down the highway without a care in the world. You're listening to the music, you're watching other cars as they pass you by. You're mildly aware of the scenery as you zoom down that road. And then, from the corner of your eye, you notice something. You spot the red and blue flashing lights of the police car. Almost instantly, you press down on the brakes. Once again, we have 2 points of tension. The first is the red and blue flashing lights, and then we have the instinctive reaction of stepping on the brakes. You know those fairy tales that we loved as kids? Well, the ones that we like the most are ones that are embedded with tension. In the case of Cinderella, she wants to go to the ball like everyone else, but there she is stuck behind while her stepsisters go off flouncing and dancing to the ball. And then she does get to the ball. The prince is entranced with her, but, and then we move on to the story, and then she loses her slipper. The prince is trying to find the girl that he met, but, and all of these things, they're all this kind of counterflow. You're going in one direction, you have to make a U-turn. Not a very long U-turn. You're not going back to the original spot. You're just taking one little U-turn and then you get back into the story. When we look at Goldilocks and the Three Bears, well, it's a story, we all know it. But it's shockingly repetitive, and it sticks to the but. So Goldilocks wants to sit down, but. Goldilocks wants to eat porridge, but. Goldilocks wants to take a nap, but. You get the idea, don't you? But just for fun, let's sneak in a Taylor Swift story. Taylor Swift is on stage in front of thousands of her fans when she introduces another singer. The crowd goes wild even before they see the other person. The other singer is Lisa Kudrow from the hit series Friends. And the song that they're going to sing, well, it's a favorite. It's called Smelly Cat. The crowd goes crazy and they all launch into the song. Notice there was no turn in that story. No but. Nothing of that sort shows up. So the story isn't as interesting as it could be. But let's run that story once again, and now with a but. So Taylor Swift is on stage in front of thousands of fans when she introduces another singer. The crowd goes wild even before they see the other person. The other singer is Lisa Kudrow from the hit series Friends, and she's going to sing an all-time favorite called Smelly Cat. The crowd goes crazy as they launch into the song. However, Lisa Kudrow isn't happy. She stops playing. She interrupts Taylor Swift. There is suddenly a hush. Then she turns to Taylor Swift and she gives her some advice. She says, "That's not how you sing it. You have to feel the music." The second story is almost identical to the first, except for the but. And the but instantly ramps up the power of the story. In fact, a story isn't really a story until there's one or more points of tension in it. It's just rather a boring sequence of events. It's the but that brings in the tension. What do you do next? Well, there are 2 steps. The first step is, what's your story? What's your metaphor? And the second is, what is the but in the story? Does it have more than one but? Is there that U-turn, that little U-turn, and then you can bring it back to the story? It sounds pretty simple, but how do you get to the story in the first place? Let's find out in this next part. Well, in pirate stories, there's always some kind of map, and somewhere on that map, you are bound to find treasure, but only if you can figure out where the X spot is located on that map. Finding treasure seems to need a lot of locating, even more digging when it comes to stories. However, that's not the case at all. The problem with storytelling is just a matter of doing some prep work. And if you sit down to think up a story, you're almost likely to believe that you're not a natural storyteller. The reality is that all of us have told stories, and we've done this since we were little kids and we came home from school and we told stories, and we told good stories. But now, as we're older, we think, oh, there's nothing new, we've already told all the stories, it's very repetitive. But yet, if you go to tell stories on a regular basis, you need some preparation, and what you need is a story bank. Without the bank, you're as hopeless as a pirate without a map. Or worse, a pirate without the map or the X on the map. To get started with the story bank, you simply need to come up with almost boring everyday situations. Here are some examples. Buying a pizza, transferring data to a new computer, going for a walk, going through a security check, meeting a friend from college, buying a totally useless app, or setting off the smoke alarm. This is kind of base level stuff that you're going to think of because you've got lots of pizza stories and you've got lots of every kind of story. So let's say we decide on the pizza story. You decide you want to have a pizza on Friday night. You get to the pizzeria's website. You put in your details, name, telephone, type of pizza, and the credit card details. The order goes through quite easily, and you're getting ready for a fun Friday night dinner. Was there any but there? No, because it's straightforward. Let's stick on that straightforward path. Let's not do anything. We're transferring data to a new computer, another story. You bought a brand new computer. All the information and the apps on the old one, as you'd expect. Now you have to back up everything, or rather transfer everything. So you have to put it on a backup drive, then restore it bit by bit. And then you have to add all the software codes to make sure that everything's working. Once again, simple, straightforward story. There is no but, there is no U-turn, there's nothing. And this is what you do. You choose 2 or 3 stories, and we just chose 2, and you add it to your story bank. At first glance, these are mundane situations. Nothing's happening. But let's take the same story like buying a pizza. So imagine you decide to have a pizza on Friday night. You get to the pizzeria's website, you put in your details, the name, the telephone, type of pizza, and then your credit card details. You hit the button, you submit the order. However, all of your data is erased. And now you have to start putting in all the details again. You're keen to get the pizza, so you go through the entire process again. Once again, your details are wiped out. Now that's a metaphor, isn't it? It's an everyday situation, but because we put in that but, because we created the however, because we had that U-turn, suddenly we have a situation where you're trying again and it's failing. As you can tell, you don't have to make up these metaphors. They're happening to you in your everyday life. As you go about buying a computer, as your car breaks down, as these everyday things happen, we experience it. We experience this sequence of events, and then there is a but. Most of us just sit down and go, okay, what's the metaphor for this story? We're writing a book, we're writing a report, we're maybe giving a presentation, and we want some kind of metaphor, some kind of story. And at that point, we're thinking, what are we going to write? That's impossible. That's so much pressure on you already that you have to create all of this other stuff, and now you have to think up a story. You have to have these everyday things in a list in advance, even if you think you're not going to use it. Just file it away. Just write about the stuff that seems so mundane. And when you create this mundane list, you have the starting point to the story. And then you add that bit of stuff that makes the story quite uniquely your own. In doing so, you've managed to take 2 important steps with storytelling. You've realized that you need a but to create attention. And secondly, it's dawned on you that you don't have to have a dramatic Cinderella kind of story. Because even Cinderella's story is nothing that great. I mean, she gets left behind. You have stories of being left behind. She goes to some place and it turns out to be great, but then something happens, and you've had that. And then you go back home and you've left something behind at somebody's place, and then they can't find you, and there's drama there. So even the Cinderella story, there's nothing that dramatic, that unusual with the story. It's the way that someone listed it and then put it together in a sequence that makes it interesting. And all along the way, there are these potholes, these speed breakers, these buts. And that's what makes the story interesting. But it starts off with something really mundane. You can take almost all everyday events and you turn them into your own. The only point that really remains, and yes, we're going backwards, is to know where the story is going to end. And we say we're going backwards because it's something that you need to know from the very start. Before you think up the story, before you have the but in place, you need to know what's the one idea that you're trying to communicate with that story. But, and this is a but, and this is where the tension comes in, we're not going to cover it in this episode. Why? Because you have to go out there and you have to make a list. And the list is your car going for repairs, your computer breaking down, your, rain coming down, which is what's been happening a lot in New Zealand. We've had torrential rain all of this month. It kept raining in December and then in January, and then we had a cyclone that wiped out major roads. And now every time it starts to rain, we're slightly panicked. That's because we've experienced the floods. And I'll tell you this story at the end of this, but just so you know, we are dealing with everyday items and making that list. And that's really the only one thing that you have to remember. As you go through your day, You're doing these everyday things like cooking, buying stuff, doing whatever you do. Make a list, and we can go from there. We will learn about the one idea and then how you apply it to that metaphor, and then you get beautiful metaphors, and it doesn't sound boring like everybody else's. And that's because most of the story is everybody else's story, but that little bit, that is your own. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. At the start of this week, I was in a restaurant and they were making hot cross buns, which is the run-up to Easter. Now, here's the thing. They make hot cross buns that are exceptional. How do we know? Well, they sell 6,000 or 7,000 of them. And all of these hot cross buns are out on the table as the customers come in, even though it's a restaurant. And people sit around them and they order them and they take them away. But nobody knows why these buns are unique. So these buns should be flying off the table, should be flying out of that restaurant in, I don't know, half an hour, an hour. There should be queues around the block. And sometimes there are. But people don't know why it's unique. They don't know that pastry that goes on the top, how much work goes into it, and how you feel so much better when you're eating it because you know what's in it. And this is the problem with most businesses. You make hot cross buns, they make hot cross buns. All the bakeries in Auckland and New Zealand and the world is probably making hot cross buns. And you don't know why people should buy from you. And that's what the uniqueness course is all about. It's not about uniqueness for your company, because most people make that mistake. They think of Volvo and they think, oh, it's a safe car company. Those days are gone. Now there are thousands of hot cross bun makers and millions of hot cross bun makers. And what we have to do is each product that we make, each service that we have, has to have its uniqueness all by itself. So you've got to do this activity over and over and over again. It doesn't matter that you've had one product or 3 products or 5 products. You have to have uniqueness all over again, which is why you need to have the ability. And that's what the uniqueness course is about. It shows you how you go about creating that uniqueness so that you can apply it to all of your products, either now or in the future. You can get some goodies absolutely free. Go to psychotactics.com/ugoodies. So that's simple enough, psychotactics.com/ugoodies. This also gives you access to a private list, a waiting list. And if you decide to buy the course, which you probably will, then you will find that you will get that email and nobody else will. So if you're not on the waiting list, you don't get the email. So you know what to do. Well, that's it for me. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? Remember how I said that we're slightly panicked in New Zealand now that we hear the sound of rain? And that's because of 2 Fridays ago. If you asked me before this year, which is the best month to come to New Zealand, I would say February. It almost never rains in February. And we've not had that much rain in March or April, all the way to May. It doesn't get that cold either. And yes, summer slips into autumn, but it's pretty pleasant overall. The unpleasantness, the rain and all that stuff, it was all of December, which is when our summer officially starts. And we're used to it. It kind of rains in December. But then it continued to rain in January. And we're still not very fussed about it. But on the 27th of January, it starts to rain. And it's about 5:30, and Renuka and I are thinking, oh, maybe we should go to a restaurant nearby. We call them and they go, no more seating available. So we stay at home. At that point, the rain has started to build up. It's 5:30, it's 6:30, it's raining and raining. And first we're out there taking pictures of the water building up. And then the water starts to rise. And it's getting to the first step of the house. and the entire garden is flooded. It's like we're in a castle and there's a moat around us. At that point, you're starting to panic because you can see the water rising. First step will go to the second step. We were watching something on Netflix, but we couldn't continue. We were focused just on the rain coming down, and it wasn't stopping. Now, you may not know this, but I'm a bit of a weather freak. I monitor what the dam levels are, and they're at 100% now, sadly. But I monitor that kind of stuff. And I also look at the clouds on the app. I don't look at the weather report. I look how the clouds are moving and where they're moving. So I knew that in about 20 minutes, that cloud would be gone and there was nothing else on the horizon. So the rain would stop. But by the time the rain stopped, the entire garden was flooded. And when I mean flooded, it was filled with water. It wasn't just damp. It was just filled with water right up to the first step. The neighbor across, up to the fourth step, it had entered her garage. And then I stepped out onto the road and I noticed that all the cars just on the adjoining road were submerged. And that's when we started to get panicked. But a couple of weeks later, we had a cyclone. And as crazy as it seemed for us in Auckland, because we had landslides and we had all of this doom and gloom, the East Coast was just battered so much that whole houses were underwater. And this has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks in New Zealand. And yesterday, it was Friday again. As we drove to the motorway, we noticed that the water from the sea had entered the motorway. And this is early in the morning with hardly any rain. By the evening, whole areas of Auckland were underwater. And so you can understand the panic now. This is about rain. I don't know whether I'd ever make it a metaphor, but that's what's happening with us right now in New Zealand. It's never happened to us in the last 23 years that we've been here, but now it's here. As I said to my niece yesterday, you know what's not cool? Global warming. I'll say bye for now on that note. Bye-bye. Oh yeah, we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.